Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Eric. Today I'm going to continue my series of videos on the best of Richard Matheson in this Penguin collection that was published several years ago. Doesn't include every story by Matheson, but it's, like I said, it's like a greatest hits collection of his stories, and it's one of my favorite short story collections. So continuing on, I guess to get right back into these, the first story I'll talk about is called Dance of the Dead. This is a kind of a post-apocalyptic story. It's in the future after there's been some atomic wars, and there's a lot of strange phenomena happening. This is a unique Matheson story in this collection where, well, he does this in other stories too, where he's kind of writing in this different type of style. He's writing in the style of the young people in this future kind of have their own slang, their own terminology. So he's writing the story from the perspective of a teenager in this futuristic style. You might compare it to A Clockwork Orange, the Burgess novel, which has its own language, like a NASDAQ, right? The English-Russian language. Here, it's just, this feels like more of like almost a beatnik type style from the 50s that we get in this story. So we follow young people around, and there's just a lot of nihilism is another big theme in the story, where the sense that there's really no future for these young people, and there's references to some of the music, kind of, you wouldn't, this is way before punk, but kind of more writers in the maybe 50s, early 60s thinking ahead of where rock music might be going into some more nihilistic direction. So there's a lot of interesting elements there in this story as far as the futuristic language that Matheson's trying to use in the story. And I don't know if I can give you an example of that here, but let's see. Yeah, just like, you'll be a floater in your rotor motor in the back seat. Have a jab, Bab. Thanks, I had one after supper. Needle, talking about using needles. You meant to tell me this is the first time you've ever been to St. Lou, but I just started school in September. Hey, you're a frosh. Hey, frosh, have a muscle tussle. So that gives you an example of that. And now this was adapted, this one, much later in 2000s by Toby Hooper for the Masters of Horror series, which it's been a while since I've watched it. It's available on Tubi, but there is a adaptation of it. I believe Billy Corrigan of the Smashing Pumpkins did the music for that short TV film, so it's definitely kind of in that 2000s grunge era that short film version of it kind of goes on. So yeah, but interesting story, Dance of the Dead. Let's see, the next one on here is Man with a Club. I guess this is another story where Matheson has a narrator. In this sense, it's sort of like almost like from the perspective of like a street criminal or someone who is observing this crazy happenings in the city, where it appears there's this caveman running around, man with a club, kind of causing trouble around the city, but it's all from the perspective of this sort of, person who speaks in a kind of street dialect. So a little bit more experimentation in this story. This is how it starts out. Geez, wait till I tell you what happened last night, Mac. I swear you'll never believe it. You'll think I'm nuts, but I swear, Mac, I swear I seen it with my own eyes. I was out with Dot, the broad that lives down near Prospect Park. Yeah, you remember her. Well, we was going up Paramount to see Frankie Lane Saturday night, putting on the dog. Show feed, take her home. Well, anyway, it was, guess, 7:30 when we come up from the RT station. So it is told in a different dialect. So a little bit of experimentation. Not a lot happens in that story. It's just kind of a interesting little vignette. The next story is called Button Button, and this was made by the Twilight Zone from the 80s. That 80s, mid 80s revival of the Twilight Zone. But the premise of this story is you have a young couple, a frequent Matheson setup, who a man shows up at their door and tells them if they hit this button in this weird box that they'll get $50,000. But the catch is that someone they don't know will end up dead. Okay, so it's one of those crazy sort of morality situations of how far people will go. So it's a great premise for a story. I think where it goes is interesting. So, but yeah, Button. This was also made into a film in the 2000s, which I saw one time, and it's the film really good. It has the same premise of the Matheson story, but it goes in some different directions than the more kind of the short story has more of an abrupt ending, and the film expands it quite a bit, which we get in these stories. But yeah, Richard Kelly, who directed Donnie Darko, did the film, the adaptation of Button. So yeah, another great premise. Like you said, I feel like Stephen King's done stories like that a lot, where people are offered, hey, if all you have to do is do this thing, and all your problems will be solved, except people might get hurt. So it's a great ethical type of question. Okay, the next story is Duel. Very famous story by Matheson. Very important story, I think, in of American short fiction. Mainly, well, at least its impact on pop culture, of course, because Steven Spielberg, young filmmaker, was given this story, and he adapted it for a TV movie in the early 1970s. I believe this story originally appeared in Playboy, but this collection has a short story. Of course, Duel helped launch Spielberg's career. The TV movie got him a lot of attention and allowed him to get into making feature films later on. But the actual story, though, and one thing that Matheson is really good at, he's really good at writing action. And I find some writers, even writers with like really high reputations, I feel like struggle sometimes with writing action scenes in a way that feels kind of visceral, that kind of unfolds in a more naturalistic way. But Matheson is really good at that. He's really good at writing action, and Duel is one example of the story where, if you're not familiar with it, it's about a salesman who is out, has a long drive, he's going to a sales meeting, and he passes this truck, and the truck starts chasing him on the California highways, clearly trying to kill the driver, whose name is Man, and that's the story. I mean, that's a very simple premise. Now, I've always heard that this was inspired by a real event where Matheson I think he was with a friend or something, and they were being chased around by a driver. Of course, this is like road rage. Today we would call that road rage. I don't know if that even had a term on it at the time this was written, but these things do happen on the highway, where you have people out there angry, having a bad day, and take out their frustrations. But I also like there's kind of like a little bit of a Western flavor to the way Matheson writes the story as well, and that's in the film with the iconography, with the California iconography in the film. But like, this is just a short paragraph from the story. He wondered what Ruth would think of all this, how she'd react. Probably she'd start to honk the horn, and would keep on honking it, assuming that eventually it would attract the attention of a policeman. He looked around with a scowl. Just where in the hell were the policemen out here, anyway? He made a scoffing noise. What policemen? Here in the boondocks? They probably had a sheriff on horseback. So that's just a little sample from the story. We're kind of inside the mind of the narrator. And so it's but the short story is really strong. I know the film, there's two different versions of the film. There's one, there were some extra scenes done because it was released in Europe as a theatrical film. So there were some scenes to pad it out, I think, to like a 90-minute runtime. But the original TV movie was much leaner and a much leaner film, and took out some of those extra scenes. And I don't think the TV version is as widely available as the theatrical one. But anyway, yeah, Duel, important story, helped get Spielberg's career going, but also I think a story with a lot of resonance for today. It's not dated that much, really. I think there's a lot to go on there. So that's Duel. The next story is called Day of Reckoning, and this is a shorter one. This is just 5 or 6 pages, and this is letters. This is one of those epistemological type of story where it's told through letters, and this is a crime story, and a kind of a disturbing one, you wants to read this one a couple times to kind of get a sense of what exactly is happening. What the story is about: a mom who did not want to have her child, and she's let's just say she's tormenting her child, which is a big theme in a lot of these Matheson stories. Children who are being, exploited or abused by adults. And this is a really, ultimately, where it's all between the lines. Like, we never really get the specifics of what's happening, so it's very understated, but so the story leaves a lot to the imagination, which makes it effective. And the way Matheson used the story through letters sort of somehow makes the impact hit harder. So Day of Reckoning, interesting story. Okay, the next one on here is called The Prisoner. Okay, not to be confused with the TV show, the from the 60s. This is another one of the ambiguous stories, more ambiguous stories in the collection, where we have the main character wakes up, he finds he's in prison, and he's in death row about to be executed, and he has no idea how he got there, and he's telling a story that he was working on the Manhattan Project in the 1940s, like the super secret part of it that's not even public knowledge at this point, and somehow he claims he ended up in the future. So it's a really ambiguous story. It's like a prison narrative, but we're also wondering, scientific ethics comes into play, the ethics of the Manhattan Project, and once again, a timely theme. So The Prisoner is, a good story, and I think the ending of it does leave some ambiguity in a good way, where you're wondering, it's one of those, is it all in the character's head, or is there something else going on? So it's a fun story to read in that regard. So The Prisoner. Dress of White Silk, the next story. This is very similar to the first story in the collection, which I talked about in the first video, called Born of Man and Woman. This is another story about a child who is confined to a room by her relatives, and we get the sense that something very sinister is going on. Whether these characters are human or not is left to the imagination, but it's just a very Matheson story that's suggesting something pretty sinister in the story. That's almost like a fairy tale too. It almost has a fairy tale quality to it, which works. But like I said, another short one, but another effective one. Okay, next is a story called Haircut, which Matheson wrote this in the 2000s. So this was a story he wrote much later in his career. And this is just about a barber who has a customer come in who is acting strange and is just kind of being strange all around as he's giving the haircut, to once again that idea of the ambiguity of humanity, where Matheson does that a lot, where we have characters where, are they human, are they not human, we're not sure. So this is working on that level, this story. I also like how it kind of captures like the going to get your hair cut, and whether the barber or the stylist, and what kind of conversations do you have, and how does that interesting dynamic work, when you're getting a haircut? Do you not say anything, or do you converse? Do you have a real chatty person working with you, or not? So I like that, and I think it's an interesting social situation that Matheson kind of adds this fantastical element to, which is another big motif throughout a lot of his best stories. So yeah, Haircut, kind of funny, kind of has a little bit of a comic bite to it as well. So yeah. So the next one is Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. Maybe one of Matheson's more well-known stories. Of course, this is about a passenger on a commercial liner who thinks he's seeing a gremlin or some kind of creature on the wing of the plane. We know that the character has a history of delusions and anxiety and things like that. But yeah, this is another example of Matheson really good at writing action here and telling stories in real time, really putting you inside the mind of the character, which is really effective. Of course, this has been adapted a few times. The original Twilight Zone series did this with William Shatner, which I rewatched, which is on Tubi, and that's really good. I think a lot. Shatner's performance in that is really good as this paranoid a character who's paranoid but trying not to act like he's paranoid, and he's trying so hard to stay calm, but we know he's just going to boil over at some point. So the story really works on that level, and a lot of close-ups, a lot of Shatner's facial expressions really work in that. And then it was done later for the Twilight Zone, the movie from the 80s, or the George Miller section of that anthology film with John Lithgow, who's also really good. I like that version a lot too, which is a little bit more fantastical, a lot more special effects and sound design, and it's a little bit more heightened than the original version from the 60s. So yeah, it works well. I even think that Jordan Peele, that brief revival of Twilight Zone from several years ago, did a riff on this story. And of course, The Simpsons did a great parody, one of their Treehouse of Horror parodies, which is was really well done. But yeah, I like in the story where it introduces the idea of gremlins. This lore among World War II pilots that there was these beings who live in the sky who are kind of messing with their mechanics of the airplanes all the time, which is really good. So there's some World War II lore in here, but yeah, a good story, and the ending's great. It kind of has a really kind of an ironic, dark ending to it, which really works well. So yeah, so if you've seen the Twilight Zones are great. The story's really good too, though. And I guess the last one I'll talk about is called The Funeral. This is more of a comedic story, kind of a dark comedy, where we're with a funeral director, and he has a strange client who is sort of planning a funeral, his own funeral apparently. And what happens in the story is we get kind of how do I say it, like a lot of classical characters from other stories appear in the funeral. So this is kind of a comedy, kind of almost like a pop culture parody almost with the funeral. So I wouldn't say it's the best story in this collection, but it's kind of amusing, and Matheson's having a little fun with that story. So okay. So I think that I'll wrap it up there. I'll probably do one more of these just to kind of do a little lightning round through this collection. But let me know if you have any thoughts on these stories, on Matheson and his influence, or any of the many adaptations of Matheson's work through the years. Yeah, let me know. But thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Have a good day.